Welcome to Mylan Advisors. I'm Jess Larson. Here on our Innovation and Leadership podcast, this is part 2 with Adam Braun.
All of you that came to work at an organization like Pens of Promise, you have some great narrative, right? And you need to find your story so that you can not just like market the organization, but market yourself as like a compelling part of it.
This is another episode of our Innovation and Leadership series where we interview pro athletes, world-class musicians, CEOs, Hollywood filmmakers, and a wide variety of other high achievers. Before we get rolling, I want to invite you to get involved with Child Rescue, the charity our founders started. To learn more about them, just come to our website, icollective.co, and check on the Child Rescue tab on our menu. Also, I want to talk to you about one of our show's sponsors. I met these guys back on episode 6. CEO Zach Smith was telling me all about starting a skateboard company and how much he hated doing the bookkeeping for a skateboard shop, and how he really got led to start this business, Bookly, that's a hybrid combining bookkeeping software and human services. And I'll tell you why I let him become a sponsor. It's because I use their service now. I don't love paying $50 an hour for bookkeepers to do stuff that I know software could do way, way cheaper. But I don't love bookkeeping at all. So I want a real live human who knows what they're talking about to help me with the stuff I don't understand. Probably the straw that broke the camel's back for me, though, the thing that put me over the top was that they could do my taxes and payroll also. So totally suggest checking them out. Go to their website, bookly.co, and check out their flat rates. I've been super happy with them. So now on to today's episode. If you didn't catch part 1, I really recommend going back to iTunes or Stitcher, wherever you're listening to this, and listen to part 1 first. So, Adam, we've talked about the big success of the nonprofit Pencils of Promise, the New York Times bestselling book, Promise of a Pencil, this venture-backed company, Mission U here, that is really turning education on its ear with a whole new perspective that's much more aligned for a student. But the thing I want to start with is, as we were ending part 1 of the episode, you were talking about dealing with the anxiety of being a leader and an entrepreneur and these kind of things, and you talked about your routine of getting up in the morning and spending time feeding your twins, newborns here, before you ever check email. And you used a word that is really interesting to me. You talked about being present with them. It sounds like that's something that is intentional. It's not by accident, being present.
Yep, for sure.
How do you think that applies? I mean, you talked about it at home with family, and I'm completely with you there. How do you think as leaders we could work on that at work, whether it's with our staff or our clients?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the simplest one is to acknowledge where the issue stems from, right? And it comes in almost, I would say, unequivocally for most people from their phone. I remember a couple of years ago when I was the CEO of Pens of Promise, we did our internal feedback reviews, which we would do quarterly. And, most of the feedback that I got was basically saying, I'd like more of your time. That said, I understand as the CEO, you have to be external. You're doing a lot of fundraising and partnership building. But when you're in the office, when I meet with you, you're also answering emails and looking at your phone and addressing those emails on your phone. And at the time, I thought, I'm being efficient and I'm multitasking and I can listen to what they're telling me while actually following up. But it was really valid feedback that these people didn't feel like I was giving them the value that they deserved. And, if I'm honest with myself, I wasn't able to be particularly present in that meeting and give the type of let's say, feedback or, set of suggestions that were actually going to move our organization forward, because I was always kind of thinking about the thing on my plate or my inbox that I needed to address next. And so what I started to do was just, put my phone down. I would close my computer screen. And when I met with somebody on our internal team, I was focused on them. And, I would ask everybody to kind of implement that across various meetings and, give people the attention that they deserve. And, sure, I lost a little bit of time answering emails, but, my quality, the quality in which I probably was addressing those emails with suffered, right? Because I was only giving the email half my attention when I was talking to somebody else. So I think it's about putting down the phone. And, as I alluded to at the end of part 1 of our interview together, it was really, really important for me recently to just decide that I'll leave my phone charging. I won't look at it at all until after I've fed our twins in the morning and spent time, talking to my wife about the day ahead and just be with my family in those early hours from 7 to 8 a.m. because the emails are going to be there. No one's, up in arms about me not replying by 7:50 in the morning. And so I think those subtle changes have actually yielded a really, really big difference.
Yeah. A question we like to ask our different guests is if there's anyone early in their life or early in their career that really stands out as setting the example for how to treat others. Is there anybody that comes to mind when we ask that question?
Yeah. Certainly, my parents, my siblings, my brother, probably in particular, have all had large impacts on me in that capacity. But, I remember a really kind of pivotal moment in my life was when I met a gentleman named Ray Chambers for the first time. Ray essentially built the modern private equity industry. Kind of the notion of leveraged buyouts was led by Ray and a company that he had called Westray Capital. And, he basically decided at a relatively young age that he had made more money than he needed and that he wanted to devote the rest of his life to humanitarian services. And so he became the UN Special Envoy for malaria and eventually the UN Special Envoy for all global health and Millennium Development Goals. And somebody introduced us. I had this kind of unique opportunity to sit in front of this man that I admired so much. And just the way in which, he kind of opened up like his whole Rolodex. I remember earlier in the week, I had spoken to somebody else who was not at Ray's level, but still a very powerful and successful businessman. And during the conversation, the guy kept on saying, do you know this person? I want to connect you to this person. And what I realized was this guy was connecting me all to people that were, call it, on my level, individuals that were running kind of organizations that were at a similar stage to mine. And when I spoke to Ray, I probably took down in that first conversational list of 8 to 12 names that he wanted me to speak to. And it was like a who's who of every industry. These were not people on my level. They were people, what I would consider on his level. I remember him saying, oh, yeah, there's a really smart young man that I mentor on technology named Jack Dorsey. Or he was like, there's another gentleman. It was the head of, the Cisco Foundation, senators and politicians. I mean, just incredible people. And it was really mind-blowing for me that in literally the first meeting, he had just made an assessment that he was going to kind of call it invest in me, and ended up, and still to this day, is someone that I consider a great mentor. He ended up joining the board of Pencils of Promise several weeks later, which was another really transformational moment for us. And I think just kind of seeing Ray in action and this notion that, even at the time I was, if I had to guess, 28, maybe 29 or something like that. But, this kind of young guy that he saw potential in and that he wanted to really devote some type of, call it his mind share or his almost like, social capital of his friends or, kind of people that he had engaged with in a business context, that he was so forthright and so generous without any expectation of receiving anything in return has always really inspired me and helped me to think about how I could, hopefully support the next generation of great leaders.
That's great. You think about the value of someone like that, and to me, just hearing that, it makes me think of the people that have done that for me too, but it also makes me think of when I get requests for time for someone who is maybe earlier in their career than me, and it's really not a good time, or it's not convenient, and the whole kind of pay it forward factor really especially as you're telling that story, it makes me think about am I willing to use up some of my social capital on somebody who can't do something for me and really be a mensch, and that's what makes, I don't know. Anyways, what a great guy. Hopefully we can all follow Ray's example, right?
Definitely.
So another question we like to ask guests, we've got our charity, Child Rescue. We build aftercare facilities in Cusco, Peru right now. We have a for youth, by youth program at high schools in America, how to not get targeted. We help fund undercover rescue missions and pay for police training, stuff like this. If you were our advisor trying to get more people involved in this issue, what would be something that comes to mind for you?
Sure. So ironically, actually, after I wrote my book, The Promise of a Pencil, I had a lot of people reaching out and saying, I finished your book. I'm all excited. I want to start an organization. What do I do next? Or I have an organization. We haven't, gotten to the size and scale that I've envisioned for us in this period of time. What's your advice? And, I would try and do quick coffee chats or phone calls with, various people. Over time, I realized I just have so much knowledge in my head about how to, start and scale to basically an 8-figure organization, that there's no way for anybody else to actually learn these things. Unfortunately, I had to kind of learn them from scratch, and there wasn't a good resource. So I don't even know if you do this, but I actually developed a course online. It's just called thenonprofitplaybook.com. Anybody can go there to thenonprofitplaybook.com and actually enroll. And there's 10 modules. I teach people like literally everything that I ever learned that I wish somebody else could teach me. And then you also have a private Facebook group of like peer experts, and there's hundreds of people that have taken it, and it's been really, really incredible to see. So I wish I could give a very long answer, but that has like hours and hours of guidance. I think, it depends on the stage at which the organization is
welcome
at.
To the
but
nonprofit.
I think one of the things that a lot of people really don't take advantage of is the notion of multi-year giving circles. So basically, these are commitments of individuals that are and oftentimes great positions. But what I heard a lot at Pencils of Promise from people, especially as we started to grow, was, look, I love what you're doing. I want to get involved in a meaningful way. The one thing I don't have is time. I have money, I have relationships, I just don't have a lot of time. And so I don't want to join your board. I can't give you that, but I can certainly support in other ways. And when you put together these multi-year giving circles, we call them our advisory board. An organization like Charity Water calls it the well for them. But you hopefully, create this kind of unique, almost exclusive body, and you ask people to make a 3-year commitment and set your minimum threshold at whatever you want. It can be, $1,000 for 3 years. It could be $100,000 at least for 3 years. But it ends up becoming a really simple ask for you, and you can generate a lot of great revenue off of these multi-year giving circles and bring together a really special group of people that look forward to the relationships that they're able to build, not through a traditional business networking forum, but through shared philanthropy.
What an incredible resource for the rest of us. I'm totally signing up for this after that call, after this call's over. That's great. That's like one of the best answers we've received in 150 interviews. So thanks so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. There's a lot more. I mean, as I said, I learned a lot, and I just, it was so frustrating for me that nobody, when all these people are like, how do I start a nonprofit? How do I grow a nonprofit? How do I do fundraising? How do I do marketing? When do I pay myself? How do I pay my staff? And like, there's really no place to learn these things. So that's what the Nonprofit Playbook is.
I love it. That's awesome. Well, listen, along the same lines of, whether it's growing Pencils of Promise, whether it's getting Mission U funded and growing Mission U, what do you feel like are the most important principles that maybe you wouldn't have figured out if you hadn't learned by doing?
It's a good one. I think one is that the moments of greatest growth are in the failures rather than the successes. I think we spend a lot of time trying to avoid failure, especially when you're starting something. And, over time, if I look back at the moments that I really learned something, it was almost unequivocally when I failed. There's like very few moments when I was really successful at something that I learned anything hugely meaningful out of it. Because essentially, if you succeed, you're kind of reinforcing what you already knew, right? Because you made a decision, it was based on something that you felt in your gut or that you had observed others doing, and you said, okay, I'm going to do what I already know or what I believe to be correct. And, now I have the positive validation because it worked. The moments of real growth are when you try something, it doesn't work out, and suddenly you're faced with this moment where you go, oh shit, I have to actually now become uncomfortable and figure out how to do this correctly. And, you also decide, do you want to keep going or do you want to pack up and kind of go home and put your tail between your legs? And there's just so much growth that evolves out of the failure. And very few people spend time trying to put themselves in positions where they fail. But I find that, if you're not in a position where you're likely to fail, at least multiple times, call it a quarter, then you're not stretching far enough, and you're not ultimately going to find the level of success that you're probably seeking. So that's a big one for me that I just really learned by doing. And then I think there's another kind of focus on not trying to be the person who does everything, but instead trying to find a team who can do the things that you aren't exceptional at much better than you ever could hope to, and then really investing your time and energy in empowering and training them to really thrive in those spaces. I think, a lot of people early on in their lives and oftentimes even in their careers, they don't do well in group projects because they try and kind of do everything, and they don't know how to delegate. They don't know how to manage others. That's something that you have to just really learn by doing. But I think one key is just to remember that, the highest functioning employee is the person always who just does their boss's job better than their boss can and takes that pressure away from the boss so they can work on a higher level issue. And if you can really focus on accomplishing that in almost any position you're in, you're going to find success.
So I want to talk about this a bit more. The business media glorifies the CEO that can do it all, the incredible visionary, right? And it makes it, it paints this picture of, the woman who did it all or the guy who did it all, right? When, in real life, it's systems, it's super well-oiled systems with highly trained individuals who know the standards to meet and have the flexibility to innovate and these kind of things. Talk about training for a second. You were talking about training them well. So many people want a system, but it seems like not everybody is willing to pay the price of training. It sounds like that's something that you have a bit of a belief in.
Oh, heavily. Yeah. I believe in a couple things. I mean, one is just if you're not investing in your team, then ultimately you're hurting your team. I mean, we're moving to an era just from an education standpoint where you were a full-time student from 5 to 22 and then a full-time professional from there on after. And that is no longer the case. We are all lifelong learners at this stage. And so, you don't need to be a full-time student until a certain age. Obviously, that's part of our reason for creating Mission U as a one-year college alternative, because we don't think most people need 4 to 6 years in order to be qualified to enter a company. And obviously, our curriculum is designed with these great companies that help us think through the needs of the 21st century economy. But with all that in mind, you have to kind of reinvest time and time again, not only in yourself, but your future workforce. And so that means, upskilling. That means having open feedback sessions. I find role playing actually to be an incredible tool that very few people use effectively. But, sitting with somebody and saying, okay, show me your, let's call it pitch. And then say, okay, let's turn the tables. I'm going to be you and you be, kind of customer X. And then showing them how it's done properly is such a powerful tool for long-term training. So, I'm a big proponent of it, and I think it's something that every company and organization should be investing heavily in.
What about the people that say, I know it's a great idea, and I told somebody in HR we need to have more of a training and development plan, but I'm busy doing the work. I don't have time to be involved in that.
Yeah, that person's always going to be busy then doing the work. I mean, it's just simple. Like if you want to make your life better, then you need to invest in people who are ultimately the greatest asset of any company, right? Is kind of the people. And it's also important for culture. I mean, it's cool now to see, honestly, that millennials aren't like some new group that's entering the workforce, but it's now just the workforce is millennials. And millennials just have a different perspective from previous generations. And they're interested in autonomy. They're interested in, the ability to kind of craft their own path to the kind of jobs and careers of their long-term desires. And they need to see that a company values them and is going to invest in their long-term growth. And so it might be nice for the moment for any leader at a company to say, oh, okay, HR can take this on. But what you're going to see is it's going to be tough to retain those top employees because this is something that they care about.
Yeah. I'm thinking now more to the system that you've invented at Mission U. And we're real book nerds here at the show, and I'm in the middle of a Clayton Christensen book right now. I really kind of geek out about innovation books, and I'm reading his book, Competing Against Luck, and he's talking about really dialing in on what's the job to be done that the customer wants, not can I perfect this tool, and how that leads to such different answers. And I feel like whether you knew it or not, you're like very, very closely following his approach. Can you talk about, as someone who is doing something different, how do you know the difference, or what's your criteria when it comes to knowing the difference between like the Henry Ford, hey, if I'd asked customers what they want, they would have said faster horses, right? So sometimes they don't know they want it until they see it exist, versus the am I just building a Segway, right? That sounds great. Right. It's gonna everybody tells me it's going to be great, but it's not really going to resonate when it gets out in the marketplace. Do you have any guidance for people as they're trying to navigate, how to know which one they are? It's interesting. I've never been asked that question, but my gut intuition tells me that there's a
there's like an underlying qualifier that they need to be honest with themselves about, which is, are they a good marketer? Because, the notion of like creating something before people know that they want it only works if you're able to market it in a way that makes it aspirational for them and can move them as well as culture in that direction. I mean, the reason that like Steve Jobs could pull off all these things in that kind of Henry Ford vein that you're describing is because he's arguably the greatest marketer over the last 25 years, right? I mean, Henry Ford is known today by his first name because he was such an incredible marketer, right? I mean, I don't know the first name of pretty much any other person who started any other company, right? Like, who's the person
who started
behind
Chevy, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't know Mr. Chevrolet. I don't know, like, Mr., Nissan or, like, any other companies, right? And there's probably somebody, I guess, Tesla maybe is the only one. And that's because Elon Musk is also probably, one of the other greatest marketers of the last decade. And so I think if you want to go down that path to say, all right, I'm going to show people the future that they don't even know that they want yet, you have to inherently be an absolutely like top 0.01 percentile marketer to not only have the vision, but then to persuade others to want that vision that you're laying out in front of them. And that to me is the more important question, is like, how gifted of a marketer are you? And then if you aren't that strong of a marketer, then you probably should look at market research and kind of, go along with the trends that, the kind of minimum viable product approach will inform you. And, if you feel like you're this incredibly gifted marketer, then you can move in that other direction. But that to me is actually the more important qualification.
Yeah. Well, assuming someone is a good marketer and they have paid the price to gain those skills and they do believe in training, as you think about systemizing, going from the leader is a good marketer and has a vision for this to really like helping the whole rest of the company get it in the bones of like, we are going to systematically duplicate that skill down across the company. What kind of principles do you have or what kind of guidance would you give to people of how to know what training is actually going to get that done, or what type of activities are going to help the whole organization get that vision and raise those skill sets?
I think you actually have to put time and energy into it. I mean, if you're not doing like an offsite, and then, I'll give you an example. Years ago at a Penn Promise offsite, it was just clear to me that like everyone was telling my story, right? I mean, I had this kind of unique story that I met this boy in India, asked him what he wanted most in the world. He said a pencil. And then I carried pens and pencils and, traveled through all these countries. And that was the founding narrative. But if you meet somebody at, a cocktail hour and it's like, so tell me about yourself. And their answer is, well, I work at this company and the company started by this guy who went on this journey. You're interested in the guy. You're not interested in the person that you're talking to. And so, what I really pushed for was that every single person in our company had an interesting story. Right? I was like, all of you that came to work at an organization like Pens of Promise, you have some great narrative, right? And you need to find your story so that you can not just like market the organization, but market yourself as like a compelling part of it to every person in every conversation you're having. And so, we spent like basically, I would say it was probably an hour or two just on this exercise about how do you tell your story in a compelling way. And so we had like flashcards and two people would sit across the desk from one another. And, I had to be who I am, and then the person across the table would like lift up a flashcard and it would say like doctor, who's 35 years old, or it would say like, spouse of your friend, or it would say, kind of all these different characters that you might come across. And then each person had to really practice and refine their kind of personal pitch. And it was, I think, a really transformational moment.
Okay. So I'm so interested to hear you actually had people role play it, because the training and development industry as a whole focuses so much on knowing what to do rather than practicing it enough for it to become a habit. That's so genius to actually not just have somebody write it down, but practice it enough that it starts to roll off the tongue, right?
Yep, definitely.
Well, listen, you've been interviewed a bunch of times, covered by the press. What do people not ask you that you would want to talk about? Or what questions should I be asking on this show?
That's a good one. I always find that people are inherently curious about like the models of a company. Like I can tell you the 5 most likely questions I'm going to get asked after I give a speech about Pens of Promise. Every time it's like, how do you choose your countries? How do you train your teachers? Blah, 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 blah. But what I'm always more interested in it, because very few people are actually about to start an organization that's going to build schools in the developing world, is the kind of personal journey, right? I mean, how do you make the decisions that you make? What leads to these kind of called breakthroughs or moments, blah, 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 that are most helpful for you. I guess a question that I don't get asked very often that I wish I got asked more is like, who is the most valuable kind of like member of your support system that deserves recognition, and what is it that they do that enables you to kind of push through, any moment? Because
let's hear about that.
I mean, the absolute truth is like, and I think anyone who has a spouse recognizes this, is that like there's no solo entrepreneur journey if you have a significant other. Because like, my wife is like inherently my other co-founder. My co-founder, Mike, is my official co-founder at Mission U, but like both of our wives are unofficial co-founders of the company because they have had to like hear about this freaking thing so many times, and their input actually has a meaningful impact. I'll be like, hey, I'm dealing with this. This person we're considering hiring gave me this response, and how would you navigate it? And, sometimes she gives me like a perfect insight. Sometimes she's like, Adam, I don't want to talk about it. Let's talk about something else. And having the, space over the next day to kind of put deeper thoughts against that specific question is actually really valuable. And so, I don't know, like I'm much more interested in listening than I am in speaking in general. And I find that like the credit always going to like the entrepreneur is something that I'd love to see shift in our society. And, like there should be at minimum a day of recognition where, my wife is, dealing with our newborn twins all day. And I'm like, she said to me, like, when do I come to the office with you at some point? Like, when's like bring your spouse to work day? And I was like, honestly, if we traded, like, I think I'd be way more exhausted than you would if you tried to take on my job and I took on yours. So I'd just love to see more appreciation for like the support systems that exist around us rather than this kind of false perception that like we're all taking it, on our own shoulders without, others helping us bear that burden.
Yeah. I definitely think of my wife as like my entrepreneurial therapist, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Like confidant, cheerleader, like the list is pretty long.
Yeah.
And it's interesting actually how much more insight she has sometimes than my partners, because over the last 15 years of us doing this together, our 15-year anniversary is next week. And we've, had entrepreneurial failings from the start, right? But she kind of knows how to listen through my BS also and like call me on things and right. That's an interesting point to make. Well, the other one that you brought up was this idea of how do you know, or what leads you personally to be able to make decisions. Let's go for that for maybe your final question here as we wrap up part 2 of the interview.
So just repeat it one more time.
Well,
how do you were
just, when I was asking what questions do people not ask, you said, they all ask about the model, but they don't ask my personal progression and what helped me to finally make this decision or get over the hump on this, I think is kind of where you were going.
Yeah.
So what do you think it is? Like what is that personal progression or that personal story or the elements that have let you know, okay, this is the time to make a decision, or here's how I know I'm comfortable enough to take a step in faith?
Sure. My process is usually I'll kind of independently have this like kind of lightning bolt of, call it inspiration or ideation, where I get really excited about something. And, the first thing I do is probably I like feel the need to either write it down or tell somebody. I need to like get it out of my head. And oftentimes it's kind of both. And so, usually I'll go to the people closest to me, oftentimes my wife or, a family member or a close friend, and I'll kind of share the idea and I'll say, what do you think? And I usually spend somewhere between like 2 to 3 weeks kind of chewing through the idea, ruminating on it, sharing it with as many people as possible, and seeing what the feedback is. And honestly, it's not really that important to me what their thoughts are. What's important to me is what are my thoughts after hearing what they think. There have been ideas where like literally every single person is like, that's a terrible idea. And that makes me want to do it even more after the 2 to 3 weeks of feedback. There are other times where everyone says it's a bad idea, and I'm like, like they're kind of right. And like deep down in my heart, I know they're right about it. And I move away from it. But I need the kind of, feedback to then shape how I feel, not necessarily taking the feedback as the new shape, but just seeing the impact that it has. And then usually within that, process, I go back to the person I started with, and I'm like, hey, here's where I'm at. What do you think? And I see what they think about it, and then I move forward. So in that process, like I need the external feedback from others to help me get to what I would consider starts out as like a raw piece of kind of marbleized truth. And then, the chiseling process happens through conversations with others. And ultimately, that's kind of, who I think deserves a lot of the credit as well.
Yeah, that's great. Well, listen, we appreciate all the time you spent with us today. Obviously, if people didn't catch part 1 of the episode, the big push here is for somebody who wants to understand what can happen at Mission U. There's a great website, missionu.com, but there's this $500 referral if you know somebody that this program for getting through a school alternative and actually getting a job, they'll pay you $500 and the student $500 to do it. And couldn't recommend it more. Hope everybody here listening goes and checks out missionu.com. Anything to add here before we end, Adam?
No. I appreciate the time. If anyone out there wants to shoot me some thoughts, I'm always available over email via adam at just the letter I, promise.org. And otherwise, you can check out MISSIONU, missionu.com, and that's our handle across Instagram and Facebook and a whole bunch of other channels. And if you want to sign up for the course I was referencing, that's at thenonprofitplaybook.com. And otherwise, I post blogs and talks and everything else at just adambraun.com.
Love it. Thanks again for making time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
That was part 2 of our interview. If you missed part 1, please go back an episode and download the episode before this one for the first half of the interview. As always, please check icollective.co for show notes of things referenced during the interview and to learn more about our guest. And if you're interested, we'd love to have you learn more about the charity Child Rescue. Go to the menu page on iCollective and click on Child Rescue. Thanks so much.